Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's HDI webinar. What will an ITSM Pro look like in 2020, and how will we get there? Today's webinar is brought to you by Landesk. I'm Roy Atkinson, and I'll be your moderator today, and we have just a few announcements before we begin. Today's featured speaker is Matt Hooper. He's the ITSM product evangelist for Landesk. And you can find Matt on Twitter at Vigilant Guy. I highly recommend that you do follow Matt. You can follow HDI on Twitter at ThinkHDI. Join HDI chat every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific time. We have a great range of topics that we talk about on Friday afternoons, and we'd love to see you there. Bring some lunch and talk to us on Twitter. We're also on Facebook and on LinkedIn, and of course members can take advantage of HDI Connect, a great HDI community site. For today, we have a great presentation for you. If you're experiencing any technical problems, please refresh your browser. You can send us questions at any time during the webcast, and they'll be answered during the Q&A session toward the end. And you'll be able to download the slides from today's presentation by opening the Attachments tab on your BrightTalk screen. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. Remember that today's webinar will be available on demand shortly after the completion of this live webcast, and you'll receive an email reminder to let you know that it's available. Now, with that housekeeping out of the way, let's move on. Author, podcaster, blogger, and Twitter addict, Matt Hooper is an engaging international speaker on agile business management, leadership, technology, and customer service. His 20-plus year career has taken him from help desk analyst to CIO. Matt brings practical and real-world insights for growing and sustaining business outcomes through organizational agility and customer centricity. An active member of ITSM DevOps and Agile communities, follow Matt on Twitter at Vigilant Guy. So, Matt, as you talk about IT becoming a competency as opposed to a department, can you talk about how businesses are, as you put it, willing to get their hands digital?
Welcome, Roy. Yes, thank you. I coined this phrase a number of years back as we start to see organizations that are more digital. And the reality is we have organizations and businesses who used to be, say, a media company, and say that you were a producer or retailer of media. You rented videos, you sold videos, you may have some small production capabilities. You had an IT department, a company like, say, Blockbuster, right, who had video chains throughout. And their business, for the most part, was brick and mortar, retail locations, retail logistics, retail distribution. But you see, in a company like Blockbuster, it's changed. The model's changed. We see companies now like Netflix, and they're technology companies that are doing the same business, but they're really centric more to the technology. And I think that's fairly pervasive across industries right now. We have technology companies that are providing healthcare. We have technology companies that are providing insurance, technology companies that are providing retail banking. And you look at the big companies like an Amazon, that's the same thing, right? It's another retailer that is really a technology company. Now they've moved into providing IT outsourcing. So instead of organizations saying, well, I have an IT department, in our traditional language, we'll say, well, the business requirement or the business stakeholder, or we'll say business accountability. But when IT is the business, it kind of changes the game a little bit, right? So what IT folks traditionally will say, shadow IT. If you ask somebody in the organization, they'll say, it's business IT. You call it something derogatory. We call it just trying to get stuff done. So it is a unique dynamic that's happening in the industry.
And I think that takes us on to something that you've mentioned, which is IT's view of the business relationship versus the business's view of IT and the relationship. And you've got a couple of slides here. Maybe you can walk us through these, and we can see the differences between those two views.
We have used this language, and you and I have even debated on on Twitter about some of this use of this term customer. And in our traditional language and, kind of ITIL language, we have this word customer, but you can see in this diagram, this, in the kind of traditional sense of IT, thinking of ourselves as a department and looking at ourselves as just a service provider, we have this kind of internal view of the other people we do business with as a customer. So we're IT, we have customers, and they're usually the other parts of the business, and then they have customers. But if you go to the next slide, you can kind of see that in this digital economy and in the way that new and upcoming executives are learning on how to leverage technology as a competitive advantage, they don't see IT in that fashion, right? They have an external customer, and it's the customer centricity around serving that external customer on how to leverage IT across business functions, and also leveraging core capabilities and outsourcing strategically to vendors, right? So it's changing the way a little bit in the dynamics of how IT's role is really there to support the ultimate business goals and objectives. Because again, now in this kind of model, IT is the business, right? It's the only piece of the organization that can see across all departments. Which department in your organization doesn't use IT, right? So it really is key to the way in which we're breaking down physical barriers and performance barriers. That's really the objective. And so we've been stuck on some old terms and old technology choices and methodologies that aren't letting us accelerate. They're holding us back sometimes when we use that isolist language such as you're my customer and I'm a service provider to you. It doesn't partner us up. It doesn't get us to the point where we're having joint conversations. And it affects the way we talk sometimes. When I speak at conferences, I use this analogy. It's a little off color, but it's kind of makes the point. We have partners in our lives, and if we talk with those partners, we use certain types of languages. But we have customers in our lives, and we use a different language. And those relationships are more formidable with our partners because of the language we use. So, for instance, if you went home and spoke to your partner like a customer, you might come home from a trip and say, hey, honey, great to see you. I've been 99.9% faithful to you. Now, if you use that language, that kind of customer language, a service provider language, you're very quickly going to break down barriers and you build up barriers and set yourselves apart from that other person who's supposed to be your strategic partner. And internally, I think organizations recognize that there are going to be security breaches. Technology is going to fail. We're going to have issues. Advancing technology comes with some level of risk. But yet we hold on to kind of this service provider, internal customer type conversation. And it just kind of, in my opinion, we constantly remind the business of what we're failing. So we say a 99% availability or average time to resolve. We use this language in our metrics in our conversation back with the business, when in reality what we need to be thinking about is what is the level of risk that we really can tolerate, and how do we move forward, and could we be faster accepting some of this risk? Right, so I call those kind of anchors that we have.
And speaking of which, terminology especially, I think that we'd probably all agree that the seminal piece of work that's been done in terms of unifying IT terminology was the ITIL and its various versions. And you have indeed described ITIL as a boat anchor, but there are good and bad aspects to anchoring. So what can you talk to us a little bit about how you see that relationship changing to the boat anchor, and is it time to cut the anchor in your view?
So, cutting an anchor is a very drastic decision, right? Anchors are imperative if you're a sailor or you're a boater. You know that your anchors can keep you from peril, right? They're a control point that help you to get stabilization in turbulent waters. And so when I reflect upon my own personal use of ITIL in my positions as CIOs and other practitioner positions, it was usually a real focus around ITIL when we were having hemorrhaging, right? We were just having one change after another breaking. The communication wasn't working. We couldn't keep operational stability. The reputation of IT had faltered. So we put in some governance. We put in the change advisory board. We put in some review processes. In other words, we'd anchor down. We'd slow things down, and we'd get some stability in place to understand exactly what we were facing. Unfortunately, what I did, and I think many others have done, was you make those rigid control processes operational and mandatory. And what has happened is some companies, their change advisory board meetings got so overwhelmed by the number of changes because of the speed in which the digital business had to operate that they would only review the top 10 or top 20 changes as part of the change advisory board meeting. Now, those are typically the most complex and the most risk-induced changes. Everything below that 20 marker is usually a very small change, low risk, easier to implement, easier to back out, easier to validate. So the less complex changes, lower risk complex changes, weren't getting released. And what project managers and developers realized is if we're going to have to go through this red tape as they started to view it, we need to combine all these changes into a bigger, more riskier, more complex change so somebody will get some eyes on it and let it go through. So inherently, when you think about that, what should have reduced our risk and allowed us to provide more governance, which is the ability to perform your organization at optimal levels, actually starts to backfire at some point. Because now the governance, instead of allowing the performance of an organization, which is what proper governance, balanced governance is, it's only focused on the control. So when you look at those changes, the implementation of ITIL in a lot of organizations have not effectively reviewed that, right? Now, it's frankly not really the fault of ITIL, but more the interpretation of it. I think the consulting organizations in the world have had a little bit to blame here too. And, frankly, it's just the general practice of it. And so, maybe ITIL has gotten a little bit of a black eye, warranted or unwarranted, but the reality is we live in a world where organizations want to move quickly, right? And that fast pace in which they move at, if the changes can't be kept up, well, then they're going to go around it. And that's why we have shadow IT. But remember, shadow IT is only what IT calls business IT. Business
Right.
IT says it's getting things done. And that's why they want to, no one wants to go out and drop, $1,400 on a MacBook Air, but they want to bring their own device because they just want to get it done quickly. They want more autonomy. So these governance and control points that we've put in place as an IT organization may have prevented us from capsizing, but when the water smoothed out, we weren't ready to lift sail and pull anchor up. And that's kind of where we are now in this space. We've also come to learn, too, that, some of these releases in changes that we thought were going to cause business impact, they were based on this kind of nebulous requirement or this idea inside of ITIL or kind of traditional ITSM thinking is that there's this business requirement out there, right? Someone's got this business requirement. We're going to build to that. Well, the reality is in these fast-paced digital organizations where IT is the business, they don't know. They don't know how consumers are going to respond to that new mobile application. They don't know how they're going to respond to this new purchasing system. They don't know how users are going to respond to this new ad campaign. And so they're in a test and learn mode at a business level. So if we're not in the test and learn mode at a technology delivery mode, then we're not aligned, right? We're not enabling the business to go out proactively, figure out what the market demands truly are. And our controls are not there. And this is why you saw things which are like more multi-speed IT, or as Gartner has coined it, kind of bimodal IT, where you have systems of innovation and system of records, and you should have one change process for that, one change process for this. Well, the reality is, and I think as most people are coming to learn, is change really has to happen at multiple speeds and multiple variants. They're going to be based on the level of risk and need and tolerable risk from a business perspective. So we're now transcending, and that's building that agility that we look for. Agility isn't just about speed. Agility is about speed and controlled speed, right? To be able to be nimble and react.
Mm-hmm. And agility was the word I was thinking of course. And actually, I'll just a little anecdote. We had a high school football coach, and we won state championships all 4 years I was in high school. He used to describe it as being mobile, agile, and hostile. So we want to take the hostility out for sure, but there's some of that in business too, as we know. So agile is being used as a noun, as an adjective. It's a great descriptive word, and now has become kind of a code and a methodology. And can you describe a little bit about what you think of when you describe agile ITSM?
Yeah, the hostility piece doesn't necessarily have to come out either. I mean, we live in a competitive world. We live in global economies. And we also live in a world too where we have people who are threatening our business reliability, durability, and sustainability, especially when it comes to our digital interactions. We have hackers, we have malicious hackers, we have governance and compliance that restricts us from being able to bring technology faster to market. We have to be aggressive in certain ways. And so when it comes to agility, what it is I try to think about agility more like a butterfly versus a caterpillar. The butterfly has a ability to sense and to see things that a caterpillar doesn't. A caterpillar's eyes can only barely see black and white, but they crawl. They crawl really slow and they eat leaves, and they don't have a whole bunch of predators because they can blend into the woodwork or the leaf around them fairly easy. They can hide under the cover of a leaf. But when you're a butterfly and you're out in the field, up in the air three-dimensionally, you're a pretty big sitting target. It's a lot easier for a bird to come in and scoop you out. Your bright colors, it's easier to see you. And so it's important that you can detect and understand the reactions that you need to make faster. And so butterflies have things like a Johnston organ, which a caterpillar doesn't have. It gives them three-dimensional awareness. They have their antennas start to pick up sensory information. They can actually smell with their antennae instead of just their mouth, like a caterpillar. So they can know whether a plant is poisonous or not from a greater distance. They don't get too close. And their eyes are more like a fly's, so they can have much greater peripheral vision. Everything is small. So you kind of break that down and you look at it. The ability to sense, detect, and react is really agility. And so when we look at these new movements like DevOps, what the whole principle is, and it's funny, Agile and DevOps, they're two words that we hear that you couldn't be further apart in their actual practical application, in my mind, because if you talk to one team that's doing what I call real Agile, they have solid plans, solid execution strategies, solid measurement, and solid monitoring. And they're constantly reviewing their process for continual improvement. Then you have some organizations who are just completely cowgirl or cowboy, throwing things out, figuring it out on the fly, and they call themselves agile. I call that agile irresponsible. And DevOps practitioners who are actually effective in demonstrating value practice the first agile, which they use very specific user stories to understand what they're building and what they're deploying. They use small iterative releases where they push those releases and they monitor the actual impact and effectiveness of those releases and use automation to roll back effectively. This allows them to make decisions in real time. This builds in them the agility that they're looking for to react fast. The other ones, they don't have the sense of awareness for the impact, and thus they can't respond effectively. And so in organizations that practice disciplined agile and disciplined DevOps, the proper type of agility that we're looking for, they can do continuous releases and continual deployments with very little impact and actually accelerate the improvements of the organizations. So I call them continually improving. Whereas the ones who are releasing and not knowing what's going on, all they're doing is building technical debt. And so they're just continually stinking.
Right.
They're just continually causing problems. And, it's not what we're talking about. Speed alone is not agility. It's the effectiveness to react. It's the effectiveness to understand. And so, it's an imperative that we bring that concept to the fore, that, being agile doesn't mean fast. Being agile doesn't mean, undocumented, wild release. Now, of course, we sometimes go to the other extreme where we over-document things. We have too many rigid controls. And so it's important that we think about how we can support the effectiveness of that. So the team dynamics, or as KCS, the institution calls it, swarming, right? We have swarming where ops people and developers are working together to solve incidents that might have just happened, instead of letting, ops people bang their head against it for 2 days before they escalate. It's collaborative insight and collaborative intelligence. And this is the agile that we're talking about when we say agile ITSM.
Cool. So can we take a little bit of a look in some of the areas where you think agility will benefit IT service management?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can see another phrase here I've kind of coined. I've heard many consultants say this expression: "A fool with a tool is still a fool." And to a many degree, that's true. But in this kind of technology advanced world in which we live in, I say a fool with a tool is still better than a fool with a pen, because if you're writing your process down on a piece of paper and you're just documenting in Visio, what you're not doing is you're not testing, you're not learning, you're not trialing and erroring. And I feel like we've reached a point now inside of enterprise technology that we have enough sensibility, there's enough awareness on how to properly monitor for fault, availability, performance, capacity, change, security, that we don't have to continue to rewrite the incident management process, right? If you looked across 20 different organizations on how they handle incidents, they're pretty much 80% identical. And so what you have to think about is, okay, how do we now automate this? Because tweaking and tuning a system is a whole lot easier than tweaking and tuning a bunch of individuals who have different agendas, different focuses, different skill sets, and different capabilities. And so when you look at kind of the traditional ITSM approach, it's a very heavy focus on human processes, like a change advisory board. Well, that board is a bunch of humans making decisions. They're reflecting on data and analysis to understand risk, conflict of changes, business impact, what was being requested, what were the assets that support them. And then they're approving these things, and those people then build code or build manual systems and deploy it. It's very much built around physical interactions. Now, what we need to do is we have to think ourselves as digital transformation leaders and not just IT support. And if we put on our digital transformation hat, what we would do is we'd look and say, okay, where are all the physical points of constraint and are getting the flow of work done? And if anybody's read the Phoenix Project, they understand that that's one of the first ways to create better operational excellence, is eliminate those constraint points, right? Understand the flow of work and eliminate those flow of work. And so as you look at these organizations, and how have you been able to allow developers to spin up a virtual operating environment through software-defined infrastructure, stand up a Docker environment, put an application stack on it, run business transactions, and take that down in a span of 15 minutes? When their change advisory board meeting meets weekly at Thursdays at 3.
Right.
Well, there's clearly a disconnect there between the speed of which technology will evolve and grow and be deployed in an environment, and the speed at which humans can actually process that information. So you see in those organizations like the Netflixes and the Etsy's and the Capital Ones, where they're doing thousands of releases a day, is that there's a heavy focus on framework automation. Changes are based on certain levels of risk criteria, and the system is automating those. And then they deal with the outliers. If the system allowed a change to go through that caused an impact, then there's a review. So all those people who are sitting reviewing all the things that probably were built by teams that hadn't yet had an incident from any of their changes on assets that probably didn't have a lot of risk to the business during times that there probably wasn't a lot of user potential impact, all that time gets freed up to really focus on the outliers and tune the system. And then they can provide more automation capabilities underneath to allow those who actually want the outcome of that technology change, the developer or the line of business manager, to request these things themselves. And the provisioning of these assets are built through connectors, where if I want to spin up a virtual environment, it knows what host to talk to and spin up that virtual environment, and I can shut that back down. And I'm not bogging down IT operations and doing manual tasks. I'm freeing up IT operations to be more value added. I'm allowing them to provide more oversight and governance, to tune monitoring, to build predictability and analyze the capacity analysis. And so as technology is released to production, they're doing more effective monitoring to understand the impact and provide that feedback to the developers in those shorter release cycles. And so this actually builds us more visibility and more transparency, which when you think about stability and you think about governance, that's really the key. So it's pushing our engineers and our analysts and our support folks, up the stack a little bit and really leveraging their human intelligence, letting them deal with the things that are difficult to program and automate, and leveraging technology then to handle all those kind of consistent things and the predictable things that we know are going to happen in the environment. Now, it's a much different mindset in kind of how we're moving forward, right?
Right, for sure. And so you've been talking about, what's the goal here, and it's to get to this agile service management state where we do understand. And this reminds me a little bit of music, okay? The best musicians that I've ever worked with or heard are people who totally understand all the fundamentals of whatever realm they're in. Great percussionists who understand everything there is to know about percussion, whether they pick that up as kids or however they come to understand it through formal training, whatever. They understand the rudiments of how to play, and then they adapt that to how it becomes part of a jazz improvisation or an orchestral arrangement. And the way you're talking about this reminds me very much of that. So we need to get from where we are now, which is less than responsive perhaps, and that IT business divide, to get to where we want to be, and that, of course, requires transformation. So let's talk about that a little bit. In digital transformation, organizational transformation, can you talk us through how you see transformation and what it means for IT professionals to be able to move ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. So, change management is really where transformation happens. We talked a little bit about that a little bit. Our releases and our changes and the way that we operate are key for us. So, thinking again about a caterpillar to a butterfly, what we have here in transformation is something very unique. I think what most organizations focus on is kind of, and even ITIL talks about it, it's the adopt and adapt, right? We take on more responsibilities in IT in some ways, and as we've seen and we talked about, most business departments are also taking on more technology responsibilities. And so this has us in a little bit of a quagmire of, who are we? So I really feel like IT has a bit of an identity crisis right now. What role do we play inside the organization, and where will we go from here? So when I talk about transformation, I love this analogy and example of a butterfly, because when a caterpillar goes into its catatonic state, this metamorphosis, which is the Greek word for transformation, that happens, it's not just an outward appearance. It's not just that a caterpillar grows wings. And when you look at kind of how IT has morphed into some of the current state, we've added business relationship management, or we've added project management offices. And what we've done, we've strapped on these things onto an existing IT organization. I feel fundamentally that was kind of the wrong approach. And then we bolt on an enterprise architecture team as well. And what we really need to do is we need to step back and say, well, think about it. What does this butterfly go through to get to where it is? When it started off as a caterpillar, do you know that in a cocoon, the caterpillar actually liquefies its innards and rebuilds all of its organs so that it can properly be balanced in flight? And as it gets its wings and as it goes to this next level, it's a completely different instrument. And so it thinks about itself differently. When it comes out of the cocoon, it's usually hanging or suspended in air. Typically, a butterfly, when it comes out of the cocoon, never walks along the branch like it did when it got into the cocoon as a caterpillar. It instantly flies. It rethinks and perceives who itself is. So the first thing I believe that we have to do inside of IT is we have to rethink who we are. So changing our language a little bit, re-examining who we serve, like who's our master. Of course, the executive board of directors are our master because they're our bosses, but really it's that end customer. And rethinking the role that we play. Are we the support organization? Are we the technologists? Or are we the digital transformation leaders? Are we finding points of constraint within our environment and finding ways to eliminate the physical barriers that we have and focus on the digital? Because that's going to question whether we're really going to be able to be funded and supported. I mean emotionally funding, the resource funding, not just financially funded, but that as well. Right? For any kind of improvement initiatives that we want to do. And how do we communicate? So that's when I talk about transformation. This is what I'm speaking of. It's a truly transformative way in which IT not only views itself, but also is perceived by the rest of the organization.
Thanks. Good explanation of what you mean by that. And of course, I like the butterfly analogy myself because we do some of that here at home in Maine. You've talked about knowledge based on real-time actions, and of course, knowledge-centered support is something that we deal with a lot and talk about a lot at HDI. And is knowledge-centered support, which is making knowledge the product of support in real time, does that kind of fit the bill? Is that the type of thing that you're thinking about?
Yeah, I think we've entered into an age, and it's interesting. I was at an HDI event this morning here in Tampa at the HDI Skyway, and Kay Robinson, who is one of the excellent examples of someone who's implemented KCS, and everything that she's done for her organization is just phenomenal. But even at the end of it, she was expressing some of her challenges now. Is that how do you keep those articles effective and current, and how do you know if those knowledge articles actually were providing value to your end users, and measuring that? If someone goes into self-service and fixes an issue, how did we know that article fixed it? And so as you kind of look at the way that knowledge is being still supported, it's still that kind of butterfly who's strapped on KCS, right? I mean, that caterpillar who's strapped on KCS. But if you juxtapose that against kind of how a butterfly would react to that, we're pushing our support and developers to create information in these very structured articles. But the reality is the response models and where we're going to handle things aren't always clearly defined. And as things are changing so fast now, as we are pushing out technology at a rapid rate, and all these assets are changing, one of the things that I had asked Kay is, are your knowledge articles associated to your configuration items? And she said, no, we're not there yet. Well, when you think about that, shouldn't your changes be associated to your configuration items? And if so, anytime you change something, don't you think that the knowledge about that artifact is also going to change? So if we have this kind of knowledge article mindset, we'll never keep pace, right? So we have to kind of think more of the terms of artifacts. Like, what are the release notes as part of the change? What was the user story for the burn down chart and the backlog for the Scrum team? Those are all artifacts that would help a analyst understand, well, what were you changing and why? And maybe that's the business outcome that you had expected, but now the user's complaining about something different. Because not every incident, as we know, is a technical resolution. Sometimes we miss the mark. And it's that feedback loop that we don't get to. So again, if we want to do is we want to be more collaborative with the information, allowing our developers tools and the things that they have to be centrally shared, to use peer knowledge as a way to better communicate and understand what is happening in the environment, who has recently made changes, and what's happening. And I love standard and case from Rob England, because it really helps us to say that, there are certain frequently asked questions and certain things we're going to consistently hit our head against. That's fine to spend some time writing articles on. But if we try to build it for everything else, it's going to be an expression that I heard from Ryan Ogilvy, who used a word called WARN. And he says it stands for write once, read never. You write these things and you put it out there and just no one ever reads it. Because by the time you even got it out there, the environment's changed.
One of the examples that I use, and there are some people who make the argument that, I think a lot of people are stuck on the how-to based knowledge article, but knowledge can be pretty much unlimited format. And one of the things that I point out is like the Delta app that shows me where my bag is. They just expose the database to the passenger so I know where my bag is, and so does everybody else. So that internally it's exposed, externally it's exposed, and that's real-time knowledge that I can use. So that's the kind of thing I'm thinking of when you're talking about it.
Yeah. And the key to that too is decentralizing it. Build a platform that's going to enable you to have contextual information. So, one of the threats of knowledge is too much information, right? So you want to have things that apply to you. So if your asset management solution is tied to you as a user, and then that asset says, hey, I'm a Lenovo Windows user, well, why show me any Mac-based iOS articles when I search for how to configure the network, right? So, you can leverage these tools to do a lot of filtering and contextualizing and almost artificial intelligence when you have an underlying platform that really is just leveraging the data that you already have. And this is, again, it's building agility, the right decision at the right time for the right people. And the really great thing about that too, Roy, is when you start to go into this mode of operation, you really start to impress the rest of the organization. You really start to demonstrate IT as, operators and enablers of technology and not just the support. People start to view you as the butterfly in which you truly, should be, right? Because now they're finding, hey, this information I get from IT is really valuable. I was going to do this business project, but now that I see the major upgrade that IT is doing or the major initiatives that IT has going on, I don't think I'm going to do that at this time. It can wait. Well, I need to talk to IT and give them a heads up. Hey, how is that going to impact me, right? It changes the relationship when you're able to work in a digital, intelligent way and be collaborative and transparent.
And of course, in order to do some of that requires funding. So let's talk about that a little bit. There's a couple of slides here around where investments are being made, and as a viewpoint of CEOs who are focused on making the transformative moves. You want to talk about these a little bit?
Yeah, this is a really important point because if, we can think that we're the digital leaders all we want, but if we're not understanding the real need for the organization in which we work for, we're going to find ourselves irrelevant very quickly. And I think IT is starting to feel that today. This data analysis from PwC shows that a percentage of spend on technology that's happening outside of IT. So what you have is you have if you look at some of the Gartner analysis and other analyst reports on how much IT is spending on technology, it's reducing. That means that IT's budget is shrinking. But if you look at the global spend on technology, software, hardware, Internet of Things devices, it's increased significantly. So where's the gap? Well, in many organizations, it's the chief marketing officer or the chief digital officer. So what does that mean? So if you look at the next slide, you can see how organizations have said, okay, technology or information, we see that IT, those services and functions have really been a little bit commoditized. And when you go back to some of the predictions by folks like Nicholas Carr, in 2003 he wrote in the Harvard Business Review a article, IT Doesn't Matter. And in that report in 2003, he talked about the commoditization of IT in such a way that most organizations would just start to buy IT services over the internet. Now think about that for a second. In 2003, Amazon was a bookstore. We might forget sometimes that that's where Amazon started, just selling books, things for like Kindle. But now they're the largest provider of cloud infrastructure, where people buy disk, computing, memory, network, firewall over the internet.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing,
yeah.
right? That's changing really how we look at digital. So for most organizations, digital doesn't mean IT.
Right, and that is truly a transformation from that early on the bookstore to the internet monster that it is today. That's truly an example of a transformative organization, I would think. So let's move on a little bit. You talk about these 4 critical questions that need to be asked, and can you walk us just through those 4?
Sure. Yeah. And part of the problem for the perception is most IT organizations, most CIOs can't answer these 4 questions. And because they can't answer these 4 questions, they can't demonstrate their digital competency and their digital strength, and thus they cannot be put or trusted in a digital leadership position. But when you think about what we do in IT support, what we do in ITSM, we're focused on these 4 questions. In fact, the whole purpose of ITSM is to understand how does work come in to IT. So how will we take on requests? Requests for support, requests for knowledge, requests for hardware, requests for software. Whatever that request is, how do we take those in? Will it come in through email, phone calls, project management office, executive agendas? How does that work come in? How do we get our arms around the demand on the IT resources? And then we reflect on how does work get done? What is our resources and capabilities? What are our skills? What is the capacity of those skills? What are the technology assets we have? What are the capacity and performance of those technology assets to accomplish the work that's being requested? And then how do we balance the focus on break-fix versus projects, right? We need to maintain operational excellence and stability, but we also need to innovate and put out new capabilities and improve our resources and capabilities. So how do we balance those things together? Ultimately, how do we demonstrate that we can leverage IT as a value proposition or as a competitive advantage in the organization? The work that IT is doing is actually value added to the organization. And if it's not work, how do we find the right supplier to provide us that function or capability that's not core or germane to the offering that we have? So, in our world of ITSM, these are really the things that we need to focus on, but most of the time we don't have the transparency into this, right? We use too many tools and too many disparate systems. We use methods like what I call the Waterfield methodology, where you have project management gathering requirements in a requirements tool, and then they manage their projects in a project management tool, and then they manage their changes in a change management tool, and their releases in a release management software release management tool, and then knowledge is in another tool, and incidents are another tool, and so ultimately you have all these disparate databases and technologies, and you're saying to yourself, this doesn't make any sense. I don't know how things can get done here, right? I don't have visibility across it. So that's why we're seeing this disruption of DevOps. We're seeing disruption of IT for IT, because these are new movements that are saying, wait a second, they're foundational layers of providing IT as a service. Whether you're doing that IT as a service internally, or you're using supplier. It really doesn't matter. What we need to do is we need to work collaboratively in an integrated fashion, and we need to be sharing information more effectively. That's the only way we have visibility and transparency across the organization to be more agile, right? So,
And is that what you? Go ahead, Matt. I'm sorry.
No. Go ahead. Ask a question.
I was just going to ask you, is that what you mean by enterprise knowledge, having that visibility and transparency across the organization?
Absolutely. Absolutely. As we are able to contextualize a lot of these artifacts, such as the use request from the user or the line of business manager into the developer who builds the user story, who then does the release and test artifacts, all of those pieces of knowledge should be readily available to anybody in the operations team to understand the change in the flow of risk. And so it really does start to give us the ability to leverage information more effectively, because that's what's going to happen for us over the next 3 to 4 years, is that the changes are going to be demanded more of us. The rate of change is happening faster. We have more Internet of Things devices being put on our networks. We're going to have more pressure to manage security. We're going to have more pressure to understand how these things are connected and who's impacted by the changes of those assets. So for years and years and years, we've been able to kick the can of configuration management. We've been able to kick the can of asset management and just put those things off. We can no longer afford to do that, right? So we need to take that kind of Waterfield methodology approach where things are very siloed and bring them back into systems of record. They're going to allow us to effectively orchestrate work and flow of work and communicate and report so that we can really, truly be agile, stop a change from happening, really, not even get involved in a change that's already low risk and is going to happen effectively, provide B2B connectors so people can just order their stuff, it goes to our suppliers, gets shipped, gets deployed, tracks the configuration management update, and ties that asset back to that user automatically. These are the really innovative things that enterprise organizations are starting to leverage to maximize their agility, to maximize their efficiencies. And so I kind of put it into this. There's really, at the end of the day, 3 systems that we have to have. We have the enterprise service model that will handle most of our service management request and fulfillment. We have enterprise knowledge that's tightly intercoupling related, which is incorporative of instant messaging. It's incorporative of real-time collaboration, things like Slack, as well as knowledge artifacts, release notes, contextual data that you can query across. And then obviously, too, the effective monitoring across all environments, development, operations, pre-production, test, that service health system that's really monitoring and determining the current state, future state, predictive state of how our services are being operated. And when I say services, I'm talking true business services. If you were an insurance company, it would be quoting, policy issuance, group policy benefits management, claims, rating, the things that really drive the business, because the assets are just a byproduct, right? And most of them at this day and age will become disposable, especially in software-defined infrastructure. So we really kind of need this consolidation for these things to happen.
And that, of course, leads us to innovation, right? When we're, again, going back to the music analogy, we have the rudiments at our disposal. We can now improvise, and that gives us the ability to create new things and innovate. And so you talk a little bit about innovation management, and you've laid out a little chart here about that. Just tell us a little bit more about what you mean by innovation management and how you see it in this view.
Yeah. So as you kind of move into becoming a butterfly, what you'll find is that project management being its own external thing and enterprise architecture being its own external thing are quickly going to find themselves without a value proposition. What we need to do is we need to operationalize projects. And what we need to do is we need to leverage enterprise architecture in a proper way. They really are. They are the feeds into service operation. And those feeds need to come from ideation and demand management and opportunity management, which are critical processes that we need to establish so that we can vet and test market dynamics. Again, we don't know what the businesses and customers are truly going to want. So we have to have a mode in which we can trial and learn and validate these business concepts, these new business ideas, the absorption of startups so that they can come into an area we can then operationalize it. It doesn't mean that we're going to get away from command and control. At some level, there is command and control, especially around, personally identifiable information, financial data, credit card, healthcare records, government security information. All of those things will consistently have command and control involved around that. But to evolve, we have to have this other set of engagement capabilities. And it might mean, an innovation lab. It might mean certain processes where you have open feedback forums. It might be where you go out and actually trial with your end users new capabilities and elicit feedback capabilities. So this is a new focus for us that is just emerging guidance starting to happen here. But really probably over the next 5 years, that those who really want to accelerate their IT career really want to be at the next level of their position by 2020. The orange is really where you need to focus some skills. Develop those skills to understand how do we do these things? How do you intake demand? How do you promote ideation? How do you, become a learning organization and be willing to test and try new ideas and concepts? How do you manage and balance that risk? Those are really valuable skills, and then, that's going to help us, right? Good. So
great. Thanks. So that's a good view on what the ITSM Pro is going to look like at 2020 and where we should be focusing. So, of course, one of the basic things that underlies all of this, and you talked about it quite a bit, is the technology. Can you show us a couple of things here about how technology underlies these ideas and specifically how Landesk works?
Yeah, sure. We're moving to an age again where you have to think about the physical constraints. So the physical constraints nowadays, when it comes to starting off with incident, because that's really a great place to start, is when we have multiple incidents, we know that we may have a major incident at hand, or maybe trying to understand what the level of impact is to that end user. So, gone are the days where we just have this simple form where you just punch in an incident. What we really want is real-time collaboration. So here's an example of Landesk workspaces where when you come into the incident form, you're not only being able to log a new incident on somebody who's called in, but you're also given contextual artifacts. What are the other incidents that just happened? What are their statuses? What are the recent configuration items that have changed? What groups have particular backloads on incidents? So that you're able to set expectation with that person on the phone. You're able to ask additional questions. So real-time information is imperative as the analyst interacts with that technology. And then the ability to then contextualize is really key. As you attach a configuration item to this incident, or maybe you attach a knowledge article to this incident that had a configuration item attached to it, it then can do some tally. So then that leads us on to problem management, so that we can actually do proactive problem management. We can say, well, what are the configuration items that have been impacted, and what might we be able to do about it? Where's the root cause, right? So if you have to do incident trending or go back and run a whole bunch of reports, that's a lot of time and very cumbersome to do, especially if the context isn't there. But if the platform contextualizes that for you, it then actually enables the process to be more automated. And so here's where we're able to actually almost use some kind of artificial intelligence to say, hey, this is the 5th incident that's been logged against this configuration item. Based on the criteria that we have, we want to go ahead and suggest that this might be a problem. And now we're going the technology stack is reaching out to the human as opposed to the other way around, right? And this is a building efficiencies. This level of agility helps us weed out those underlying causes that may continually cause us to be reactive. And very few organizations have been able to get to the level of proactive problem management we need to. And usually, it's just because we don't have the ability to correlate the underlying data. But if things are tied together in the back end and the system's designed and built for that purpose, it really does allow the flow of work to happen in a more automated fashion, right? And it allows us to leverage this intelligence. And then we know what happens here is this problem is going to turn into a change, right? So we want to leverage this change to resolve that problem. So again, here, do I have to go and query and figure out all the assets that I want to apply as part of the change? No, they were already part of the incident, should have rolled over contextually to the problem, and they do. They will now roll up into contextually the change itself. So when I create this new change from the problem, and I raise that change, all the configuration items are staying consistent. They're automatically attached. This is helping with the contextual information. And then based on the level of risk associated with those configuration items, that will determine whether this gets a CAB review. That will determine the level of risk associated with it or when the release can actually happen. Because these may be assets, again, that don't have a high level of business risk, aren't, falling under SOX compliance or HIPAA compliance or anything else. So go ahead and apply the fix and get this thing resolved, and let's move on to better and bigger business, right? So this is where agility really comes in. And as you can see in the screens, what we're trying to do at Landesk is make them visual, bring intelligence up, make them more kind of infographic-like so that you can make decisions faster. It's really a decision-making platform at the end of the day, and it's just where you are in the process and what's next. And that's really going to help us. So as we move into our analytics view, we can do a lot of things. We can say, hey, listen, if there's software out there that we've not used in 6 months, I want you to remove that software from that person's workstation because right now we'd have to true up and spend $5 million. I'd rather pull that software back and not have get audited or have to pay those fundings. This is really powerful information that we can do all in the background. Right? We can enable you to make sure that you're focused on where are our software patches, where are our software being used, how have changes impacted end users and business services. So really providing true analytics that are going to save you time, save you money, help you focus on the right things. That's just the power of automation, the power of taking that knowledge artifact approach and really focusing on not human processes, but just that solid state of IT operational excellence. Right? It's changing definitely the way that we're going to be able to leverage and provide more value to the business from an IT standpoint.
Great. Then, Matt, it's always a pleasure to talk with you, and thanks for walking us through your view of what's going to happen between over the next 4 or 5 years and how we're going to get there. It's an amazingly interesting time to be involved in technology for sure, and thanks for sharing your views with us. Just a couple of closing notes here. We didn't have any questions come in, but it's been pretty much a Q&A session between me and Matt. We appreciate that you tuned in. Our next webinar coming up is going to be Changing Preferences and Changing Options. It's all about customer service. Speaking of customer service, Matt, and that's going to be with Dana Olson on October 5th at 1 p.m., and the sponsor is LogMeIn Rescue. And this webcast is copyright 2016 by United Business Media, LLC. This presentation materials are owned or copyrighted, if that's the case, by HDI, which is solely responsible for its content. And the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. Thank you so much again. Thanks to Landesk for sponsoring today's presentation. And remember that this will be available on demand within probably a few minutes. And we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Roy.